Hello there, my very good friends. On today's wrestling news, we're going to tell you all about those CM Punk and We Want Wyatt chants from last night's episode of Raw.
Also on last night's Raw, Nia Jax was busted wide open.
We will talk the real reason that Ric Flair requested his WWE release.
And WWE's network partners aren't happy about Bray Wyatt's release. I'm Adam Wilborn.
And I'm Andy Murray.
And this is the news.
Okay, let's kick things off by talking about that Raw crowd last night, because it was pretty spicy. Now, you know, it wasn't as chaotic as some crowds we've seen, you know, when people talk of taking the show hostage and all that stuff. There was no beach balls, nothing like that. But, you know, you're in Chicago. Chicago has never been shy of showing its true opinion on something, whether or not it jibes with WWE's narrative or not. You know, CM Punk's returning to wrestling, that's their hometown guy, and Bray Wyatt, who's very popular, just got released, and Goldberg, who is kind of like the new part-time hate figure in WWE's on the card. You knew they were going to make some noise. You knew there were going to be some chants, and there most certainly were. So before the show even started, there's a bunch of clips doing the rounds on social media of CM Punk during main event tapings, and like just before Raw itself kicked off and everything else. They were apparent on the show as well. There was some in the opening segment, which was Bobby Lashley and Goldberg. There was some while Doudrop was wrestling. Who did she wrestle? Tamina. There was some during the Miz TV segment that Damian Priest looked like he was having a good time with. And there was some in the Charlotte Flair versus Nikki ASH main event as well, which is interesting because that match got a "This is awesome" chant later on. So people were clearly enjoying that to a degree. But there's also chants of "We Want Wyatt." I mean, you kind of expected that. This was primarily during the Bobby Lashley and Goldberg segment at the beginning. Now, I think WWE generally did a good job of, you know, if these things were loud and booming, and there's loads of clips on social media, they did a good job of making them seem a little bit less overbearing than they often are. It was because WWE, as we know, and as has been apparent on pretty much every show that has happened since crowd returns, they're still sweetening those crowd reactions, brother. We got that Goldberg ring entrance and everyone was going, Goldberg. We're supposed to believe that after his first mention from Bobby Lashley, and MVP gets thunderous boos around the building. So there's some pretty transparent sweetening going on. So maybe that helped mask them. But Adam Wilborn, what do you reckon? For one, I'm not into policing crowd reactions. I think paying customers can do and say what they want as long as it's not really offensive. But what do you reckon, Adam?
No, I'm with you. I also enjoyed Drew McIntyre to come out to thunderous cheers, and Michael Cole apparently in the audience going 16 times for some reason. Look, I love the carnage. We all knew what to expect when they were heading to Chicago for Monday Night Raw last night. I mean, they tried to get around it, like you say, they sweetened the crowd. They very much limited Alexa Bliss's involvement in it all, kept that backstage, and so they could just tweak it just that little bit, like you say. I say little bit, turn it in, Adam. I think my only exception to this is the what chant. I hate it. Unless it's Stone Cold, it just doesn't work for me. But everything else, yeah, have it out, because WWE kind of deserve it, if I'm honest.
Yeah, make some noise, man. Make some goddamn noise. Like, if McDonald's come through with a new menu item, it doesn't sell well and everyone hates it. Nobody blames the customers. But in wrestling, it seems there's this thing where it's, they're taking the show hostage, blah, 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 they're rebelling. It's like, yeah, I'm sure if you're a wrestler and you're in there and people are chanting for CM Punk, who has nothing to do with the show, it's not nice. But that's, WWE reap what they sow in this regard. These things are a response. They're a reaction to what is being sent to them. They don't think CM Punk is going to show up. They chant this because they don't like what's being presented to them. So for me, the buck starts and ends with the company. Keep your beach balls at home. That kind of sucks. That kind of sucks. But as far as chants go, have at it, man. I think it's fun.
Do you think Mustafa Ali was going to lose before all the Chicago crowd decided to ruin Monday Night Raw? I get it. It probably works quite well with the story of him and Mansoor. But I just thought, as soon as he came out and I went, oh yeah, he's from Chicago. Well, they're losing to Mace and T-Bar tonight, aren't they?
Yeah, poor guys, man.
At least Keith Lee won. Congratulations, mate. Very happy for you. Sorry to you, Karrion Kross. A worse book champion on Raw than Reggie. Right, let's move on and talk about Nia Jax. She got busted wide open in a match with Rhea Ripley last night. It seemed to happen while she was sort of reversing out of an attempted powerbomb. Ripley taking her down to the mat. To be honest, it seems fine. She wasn't affected. The match finished normally. She even got hit by the Riptide post-match by Rhea Ripley, the big baby face that she is. I feel bad. Look, from all accounts, she appears to be fine. No word on, if this is going to take her out of the ring for any time. But you would assume not, hopefully not. But
Yeah.
I do feel a bit guilty, but this always kind of adds to a match when I see it. Not blading or busting wide open every single match, but sometimes on occasion I do kind of like it, if that sounds quite ghoulish, Andy.
No, I hear you. Obviously, you don't want people to get hurt and everything else, and we're not going to sit here and go, hey, I hope that person gets cut tonight.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when there is a little bit of accidental colour and the person isn't harmed by it and everything else, it can add a bit of extra heat and intensity to an encounter. Obviously, you hope Nia Jax is okay. She kind of looked like Two-Face. Like, half of her face was just red, and then the rest was as it normally is. So, yeah,
Shout
obviously...
out to you, Andy, actually, for the write-up of this, because I love the phrase crimson mask. And I like that that's been added to the article.
It's a beautiful phrase, isn't it? A crimson bloody mask. Let's move on. Let's talk Ric Flair, who was released by WWE yesterday. This is an interesting report. So Wrestling Inc. and Fightful actually co-broke the story, and then Fightful Select have come through with some new information on Ric Flair's release. He requested his release, by the way. He went to Vince and said, hey, let me out. And Vince McMahon did indeed let him out. Apparently, according to sources of Fightful Select, Flair was pretty frustrated with certain creative things that were happening on the show, certain booking decisions. He went up to Vince, voiced his issues, and then requested his release, and it was granted. Now, this is interesting, as Flair hasn't been on TV for a while, since earlier this year, but he has spoken out against that not for us Lacey Evans storyline, shall we say, with Charlotte Flair and everything else. But it said here from one of the sources that he was particularly unhappy with some recent booking decisions that he didn't like. So Ric Flair's gone. He's out of WWE. Not much more to add than that, I guess. He wasn't really being used all that often. But he was good for a nostalgia pop here and there. I'm sure he was useful in his ambassador's role as well. What do you reckon of Ric Flair fleeing the coop?
I'm simultaneously surprised and not surprised whatsoever by all of this, actually. Like you say, they had the storyline with Lacey Evans, which, I did not enjoy. And, I felt like they were just misutilizing him, if I'm perfectly honest. Occasionally it worked, like when he was just saying how great Randy Orton was, but for the most part, it did feel like they were just putting him out there for the sake of saying they could put Ric Flair out there. I'm intrigued to see what happens next, particularly with that photo that was all over social media of Tully, Arn, and FTR throwing up the four. Maybe, who knows, he could head to AEW. He could be the next name to be announced to be All Elite. And I suppose even then, the mutants on Twitter will say, another WWE cast off I see, despite the fact that's not how it works. But still, intriguing to see where he goes next is the best way of putting this, I think, Andy. Yeah,
for sure. So what you're saying is that he is definitely Kenny Omega's opponent at All Out, right?
Oh, God. I still can't believe they're not going to do Hangman, if I'm perfectly honest. But, well, let's wait and see what happens on Dynamite this week. Let's talk a little bit more about Bray Wyatt's WWE release. We talked yesterday about how that had affected morale backstage. And, well, the company's networking partners aren't happy either. This comes from Andrew Zarian of the Mat Men Pro Wrestling podcast, who quoted a network source basically saying they are disappointed and a little bit scared by the situation. I'll read you the tweet. Andrew Zarian tweeting, on vacation, so I'm behind with stuff. I'm hearing a lot of frustration from the networks regarding Bray's release. He says, quotes the network source saying, Bray's release is really disappointing and a little scary that top stars are being let go. You have to remember, perception is everything. So it's not 100%. Just backstage that are affected by this now.
Yeah. I mean, this release, like I said yesterday, kind of blew me away. Of all the names, Braun was a surprise, but Bray Wyatt, I was like, regardless of what you think subjectively of his output, and we've been critical of it 100% and stand by those criticisms, think they're fair. But a lot of people are really into this guy, and he sold loads of merchandise and everything else. I wouldn't be surprised if a TV exec looks at this guy who is so striking visually and everything else and goes, what? Why have you gotten rid of him? These people are coming from a non-wrestling perspective as well. They're not necessarily big wrestling nerds like us dorks. So they have a completely different view on the situation. And I can understand this completely. Feels like there are more twists to this Bray Wyatt tale. I, honest to God, wouldn't be surprised if he ended up back in WWE, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll talk more about him in a second. And you mentioned the merch. Did you see the photo on Twitter that you were apparently selling Bray Wyatt merch? Still at full price on last night's Monday Night Raw. So, I suppose they just don't need him in the company. They just sell his stuff regardless. Let's move on to your Twitter questions at WhatCulture WWE. Ryan Ahad starts us off today. Ahad, I'll go with. Ryan says, so with how WWE is releasing big name stars and internal workers, do you think WWE will be the place that future professional wrestlers would want to go to?
I think this is a very interesting discussion, and a lot of people just assume that because WWE is the biggest company in professional wrestling, that everyone by default wants to go there. But we have plenty of evidence to show that that's not necessarily the case. How many big names have turned down WWE over the years? The Kenny Omegas, the Young Bucks, the Hangman Pages. There's loads more you can potentially quote. WWE obviously has incomparable levels of exposure. They're the biggest platform, everything else. But, elsewhere, people might be more creatively fulfilled and other arguments that you can apply as well. I think, however, that with younger wrestlers, if you're, say, some 19, 20-year-old who's just been signed by WWE, you've come up watching that program and not really knowing anything else a lot of the time. Like, WWE had the monopoly in the United States, so they will always have that hold from this generation in particular who've grown up in the post-Monday Night War era. But it's going to vary from case to case. I will say, however, if you look at recent releases and the justification given for them, it doesn't exactly make it look like a great place to work, does it?
No, exactly. I think, who was your boy who went to NXT UK, who popped up who was on AEW for a bit, the British guy? His name's completely escaped. Ben Carter. I think he could genuinely be one of the last ones because it's those people who've grown up with all they've known is WWE, and that makes sense that you want to elevate yourself to that level. But there's so many other options now. I'm not just going to say people are suddenly going to go, I want to be AEW. You could want to end up in New Japan. You could want to end up in Game Changer Wrestling. Who bloody knows? But I think the times they are a-changing, to quote Robert Dillon. Right, second question today comes from David Rivera, who says, Saludos, leyendas, which is apparently greetings, nice. Legends in Spanish. Apologies for ruining that language. David says, continuing the whole Bray Wyatt discussion, you mentioned Impact as a possibility. Yep, Andy said that could be where he heads yesterday. How about New Japan? With a Fiend-like character, he could be a destroyer gaijin like Vader. Thoughts?
So, my opinion on this differs with a lot of people. I actually think New Japan is the worst fit for Bray Wyatt because with all due respect to his performance ability and everything else, he doesn't exactly have a long string of traditionally great matches, the kind of which that would go over well in New Japan, like traditionally well-worked things that aren't, with loads of smoke and mirrors and gimmicks and everything else. So I don't necessarily think he's a great fit for that promotion. Also, the Vader comparison, Vader was terrifying. He was bigger than Bray. He was just naturally scarier than Bray. With Bray, it's a different kind of fear. It's more horror movie-ish. It's more kind of cartoony. It's more elaborate. Whereas Vader was just a massive giant dude who was really stiff and got his eyeball knocked out and just continued fighting. So I think it's different levels of appeal. I'm not convinced by Bray in New Japan. I don't think that that's a good fit for him. However, I will acknowledge that you don't really know what people are capable of until they get out of a system that might be restricting them. So I wouldn't rule it out entirely.
Let me gaijin? No. Okay, final question today comes from Mimi Burris, who says, hi guys, from Johnny Drip's Dripstick to Hacksaw Jim Duggan's 2x4, what is your guys' all-time favourite signature prop in wrestling? Have a great Tuesday. You have a great Tuesday too, Mimi.
Oh man, right, I'm going to age myself here by naming a trio of props that I love. Jim Cornette's tennis racket.
Yes!
Say what you will about Jim Cornette, he was a great manager, and that tennis racket, when it was loaded up in particular, ruled. Bruiser Brody's chains and Stan Hansen's bull rope with the cowbell attached. Mainly because if you watch those guys doing their ring entrances and they're swinging these things around, if you're in the way of that, you are getting flattened because those guys were terrifying. So those are my three props. Also, shout out to Moppy. Why not?
Yes. I did love Xavier Woods' trombone for a while and the way he would sell it getting murdered. I'm also a guy who loves head, of course. And I'm going to conclude by saying
It's a PG
that
show.
my favourite is probably Razor Ramon's toothpick, because I have to pick that because I've incorporated that into my D&D character. Titus Thunder Bastard Caligarvi, when he wants to start a fight, throws his gold toothpick at someone. So I'm going to have to go with that one. God, I'm sad sometimes, aren't I, Andy?
No, not at all.
Like what you like, it's okay. Let's conclude with today's and finally. And we talked about Ric Flair leaving WWE, and Evil Uno responded to it saying, Ric Flair should join Dark Order. For real though, let's party. Woo, man. Which is just, I think, might be the one thing that convinces Rick to go to AEW. That tweet, I love it.
Yeah, it's tremendous. Evil Uno is one of the champions of Twitter and the champion in all of our hearts. Very interested to see what Ric Flair's next move is going to be, for sure.
Yeah, let us know your thoughts in the comments section down below. As with everything that we have discussed, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from, for daily wrestling podcasts. Myself and one of the Dadley boys. Which one? You'll have to find out. One of them's on holiday all week, and you can probably guess which one that is. Actually, if you listen to any of the podcasts yesterday, we're going to be reviewing Raw and previewing NXT later on today. Plus, let us know your thoughts and Twitter questions on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. Why should they follow both of us? You can follow Andy Murray at...
You follow me at Andy H. Murray. The H today stands for Happy Birthday, Nyla Rose, the undisputed champion of wrestling Twitter. Really love her takedowns. She's a legend. Respect.
And a friend of the channel. Happy birthday, Nyla. Follow me on Twitter at Adam Wilborn. Follow us all at WhatCultureWWE. But for now, my thanks to Andy Murray. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you soon.